Good call, Kelly. Well, today we are jumping back into Nehemiah chapter 4. The previous week, we stood in Nehemiah and we preached over one verse, and it was verse 10. And it was heavy words. In fact, those words were this. And it said, "The strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild this wall." Remember where we found Nehemiah and the Israelites, those who lived in Judea at that time. We found them, they were too far away from the excitement from chapter 2. They were like, yeah, let's build this wall. Let's get things going. Let's get God's city back in action. And now they found themselves in the middle where things were really messy at the time. And they were too far away from the end to see the blessing that was residing there. And we called that the messy middle. And that mattered because the messy middle is where God uses a trial in your life to expose what you're trusting in. How many of you have come to the realization that as much of a strong Christian you want to believe, you're still weak? And you find yourselves trusting in things that are not eternal, but things that are temporary. And that's what the messy middle does. And so for these builders, they were on the wall, and suddenly their confidence had shifted. They ran out of their human strength, and they were trying to fulfill this divine call, this supernatural call that God had on their lives. And then all of a sudden they said, I can't do it. We can't do it. There is a point in your life as a Christian where God will take you as an individual, and God will take us corporately where we are exposed to what we were really trusting in. And we found out that the messy middle is actually holy ground, because it's the place where we come at the end of ourselves and the very beginning of what God can do in our lives. And so today, we're going to pick back up the same story. We're going to be in the same messy middle. There's going to be the same rubble. There's going to be the same threats, the same problems. But this week, we find out what God can actually do in and through you during this time in the messy middle. So again, the word of the Lord read over you, starting at verse 10. The strength of those who bear the burden is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild this wall. Verse 12 says, let's skip. Verse 11 says, and our enemies said. So listen to the voices, because I want to preach about this. So there's having this internal dialogue that they're struggling with. We can't do it. And now they're talking about all the different voices that are happening. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. Right? So this is a hostile work environment. Anybody work in a hostile work environment? This is that. Verse 12 says, and that time the Jews who lived near them, so now it's their neighbors, right? The Jews are saying, who lived or watching this work from afar, they came from all directions. And they said to us, not once, not twice. This is like that Stewie meme. Mom, 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 right? But 10 times you must return to us. In the messy middle, discouragement is abundant. I don't know if you come in here discouraged this morning, but if you are, that might be a sign and a symptom that Satan is trying to distract your view and get it off of God and onto yourself or onto those who. And so this discouragement is abundant. Opposition right now in this moment in chapter 4 is at its peak. And did you see how it comes? Verse 10, the rubble speaks. So they're looking and they're seeing, they're observing what things look like, and it's telling them you can't do it. Verse 11, the enemy speaks. We're going to kill you. We're going to show up. You don't even know when we're going to show up, but we're going to get you, right? So there's this fear that's coming. And verse 12, even their neighbors begin to speak 10 times. Come on, just come back home. Stop doing this. Just give up. There are countless voices that are whirling around when you find yourself in the messy middle, and God is trying to propel you forward, but you have to wrestle. Am I going to be faithful with the call of God, or do I just give up? So these voices whirl around. And church, notice this. Notice what has not happened in chapter 4. When you read this, this week by yourself, or maybe you already came in and read this, you'll know that not one sword was swung. Nobody has been touched. Nobody has been hurt. Nobody has been harmed. And this isn't an accident, church, because this is exactly the pattern that your enemy, the devil, will use against you this very day. The exact same thing. You see, what he does is his very first attack on your life is going to be discouragement. That's the first attack. So hear this. So much of what you're going to face as a Christian, trying to obey and follow after God, is this, a war of words. The biggest battle is right here in your mind at times. Think about your temptations this week that you've endured, you've encountered, temptations that you submitted to. And where did it all start? With just a thought. You were driving, and boom, this just random thought pops in your mind. And at that moment, you have a chance to either cast that thought down, bring it to submission, obedience to Jesus Christ, or you start to play with it a little bit. Oh, I wonder what would happen. And then pretty soon, right, sin will take you further, and it will ride you harder than you ever thought it would. And there will be an assault on your mind that comes through your natural senses. And you got to be aware of that, church. The rubble, it's too much. They're seeing things. I don't know if some of you are going home and you're discouraged. Man, my house is so messy. I don't know how I'm ever going to clean this thing up. FYI, I just throw it in there because I did clean up the bathroom last week. I know some of you are worried about that. I got my clothes out. Right, what are we going to do with this mess? And then the enemy is plotting. How many of you are captivated right now by a fearful thought? Something in your mind that's telling you, man, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know how God's going to come through. But you feel this call. God's telling you to walk in faith, but you're going to begin to wrestle with this fear. What does the Bible tell us? Perfect what? Cast out all fear. Perfect love, right? God is love. The moment you begin to start fearing, you need to have your supernatural senses go up as a spiritual being and saying, this is not from God, because God is love. God casts out all fear. And if you find yourself fearing for tomorrow, fearing for provisions, fearing or relationships and reconciliation, all these various things, you need to realize that begins to come through the enemy, through fear. Even those who are familiar with you will offer you comfort if you abandon God's call in your life. We saw in the Gospels, Peter just had this really high moment. You are the Son of God. And then what happens? Jesus says, I need to go die. This is what God has called me to do. And Peter's like, God forbid. And what does Jesus do? He realized that the war was not between him and Peter. He realized that there was a spiritual element behind that thought. And he said, get behind me, Satan. So the enemy's goal is simple in your life. Can he get you to stop trusting the God who issued the supernatural call on your life? That's what was happening in Nehemiah. God had called Nehemiah to raise up a group of people to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem, to make it back to the city of God. And now the enemy is beginning to plot. And they are frustrated because they don't have the strength to do what God's called them to do. And Satan is trying to discourage them by walking away from the call of God. And again, notice all the assaults that are coming. It's multiple fronts. The enemy will attack you to exhaust you, to wear you down. And so the question for us this morning is, how do you fight that? How do you fight back? Because these people in chapter 4, they are afraid. The reports of them coming and killing them when they're not sure, those reports are landing. They're having an impact. Their strength is disappearing. Oh, man, if I have to touch one more rock, I'm going to go crazy. Like, what point do you start chucking them at your neighbor? Like, I'm done with this. He's just having a down time. The enemy appears to be winning. So let's look to see how Nehemiah encourages the people to push past this messy middle. Verse 14. Sorry. Did I jump too far? Verse 14. Do not be what? Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Wait a minute, did I skip something? I apologize. Verse 14, we're good. So remember the Lord, that he is great and awesome, and what? Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Now, watch what he does not say to these broken people. He doesn't say to them, you're a bunch of cowards. What is wrong with you? Suck it up. Get your boots, strap your sandals, let's get back to work. We got stuff to be done. He doesn't say dig deep. He doesn't say you're Christians. Christians don't act like this. What is wrong with you? You're a lover of God, right? You're very fleshly right now. See, notice what he does not say to them. He tells them, don't be afraid, because there was real fear. It's okay to be fearful at times, but you don't give in to the fear in your life. You remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. He tells them this, simply remember. So I did jump too far. Simply remember, right? Remember the Lord. Remembering does not hit everyone the same way. How many of you can be in the same situation and you ask someone to recall what happened and it's two different stories, right? You experience it two different ways. Emotions, just you weren't paying attention, whatever. But there's a great chapter, a great example of this in the 3rd chapter of Ezra. You see, the Babylonians, they had previously destroyed Jerusalem, and Solomon's temple was down to rubble. And they were exiled for 70 years out of their homeland. And finally, they were allowed to come back, and they pulled all their resources together, and they successfully built a new foundation for the second temple. Now, when that temple was laid, something interesting happened. You had two classes of people. You had the old priest, the old guard, the people who were there who were able to see Solomon's temple. They remembered Solomon's beauty, the grandeur of that temple, and now they're just looking at a foundation. And what did the priest do? The old priest, do you remember this story at all in Ezra chapter 3? The old priest began to weep and wail. They were crying. We're just talking about transitions this morning. They were transitioning to this new temple, and the old guard was like, we don't want anything to do with it. This is horrible. They were crying. And then in the exact same crowd, you have the younger people. And they were the ones who grew up, and they heard all the stories about the temple, and they heard how great and awesome God was. They heard about 2 Kings 8 or 1 Kings 8, where the Spirit of God just came down and filled the temple. And it was amazing. And they began to shout for joy. And in the midst of this crowd, you have two groups of people experiencing two different emotions. Same wall, same moment, two different experiences. One from memory and one from momentum. And as just building on what Kelly was talking about this morning, in our transition, some of us are going to find ourselves weeping because we remember what it used to be like. And then you have other people, like Rhonda was praying, I'm super excited. You know, we love our pastor. He's great. He's not going to do anything wrong. Just give it to, just give it time, Rhonda. I'll let you down sooner or later. It'll happen, I promise. Hand to God. I know it'll happen. That time will come, right? But you have two examples of something that's happening even in our congregation where people are excited and yet people are still sad. But what does Nehemiah tell them to do? What's the uniter? How do you bring those two groups together and to have one heart, like John talked about in Ezekiel? How do you get that? You remember the Lord. The focus, the challenge is to remember. So if your tendency, while you're in this messy middle and you find yourself in transition or just in the daily humdrums of life and you just find things that are difficult and you tend to long for the time of, man, I remember just 2 years ago, things were so much easier. I just wish I could go back to that time. Or if you're someone who lives for the future and you're like, I can't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be so good. The challenge for both of you in that situation is to remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Then Nehemiah tells something that we might find initially reluctant to do. Look what he says next. I don't know how I keep jumping ahead. Do not be afraid, but remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and what? Fight. Fight. Fight? How do you feel about that? I know we have some of our Mennonites in here who are pacifists. John, how do you feel about fighting? Well, he wants to fight me right now. I saw that. Just kidding. Right? Is there anyone in here who just likes to square up? You just say something really and you just pop off real fast. Like you're just ready to go. It doesn't matter. You're just ready to trade blows. You just like to scrap. Maybe you're someone who likes to fight verbally or just sort of passive-aggressively. Any passive-aggressive fighters in this room right now? Maybe you're sort of like a transformer, and when you get in the car, you turn into a Decepticon, and you just want to drive and blow everything up and get everyone out of your way. But remember, we're in the messy middle. And when we hear fight, we think, let's go right now. Let's settle this. But Christian, remember, you are both fleshly and you are both spiritual. And to fulfill the call of God on your life, you cannot operate in the flesh and honor God. It's impossible. Human strength is not going to get you out of your discouragement. Human effort is not going to get you to go to the destination that God has called you to be. Furthermore, church, we're New Testament Christians. And that means that we know that we do not wrestle. We do not fight against flesh and blood. I want you to think about some of the arguments in your life right now. Some of the people that you're annoyed at right now that you see them, you walk the other way, you're in the same store, you go to the other aisle. You hurry up and check out, right? I knew I should have ordered my food to go. Why did I come in here? Dang it. And I've learned, I'm a little socially awkward at times, and so actually I'll confess this. The other day, I was at Aldi, and I just get nervous when I see people, and I saw Eureka in Aldi. You didn't know it was Eureka. It was about 2 weeks ago. And I said, oh, there's Eureka. Oh, my gosh, there's Eureka. And I was like, what do I do? And it's just my introvertness comes out, and I went to the other aisle. Eureka checked out, didn't even know I was there. I confessed my sin, Eureka, forgive me, right? I don't know what that has to do, and I just feel deburdened, but if I avoid you in public, it's just because I get shy. That's it. But we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. But a lot of times, our spiritual wars that we face as Christians manifest fleshly. So the people that you have arguments with, the people that annoy you, that you just can't stand, that you think, man, I just wish God would take care of them really fast and just get them out of my life, sometimes that's a spiritual thing that's manifesting fleshly. And just like Peter and Jesus, you have to look past the person and you have to put your spiritual eyes on and see what it is that God is doing in that situation and how you can honor him. So we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but this is who we really actually wrestle against, church, against principalities. Can someone define principalities? Yeah, look that up when you get home today. Against powers, against the rulers of what? Darkness of this age. How many of you know there's a lot of darkness in this age right now? Against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Our battles may manifest physically in front of us, and if we're operating in the flesh, we are not going to love one another. We are going to begin combating with each other, and we're missing that the enemy is doing something behind the scenes spiritually that we're supposed to address. Remember, this whole chapter, no one has been hurt, no one's been maimed, no one's been killed. And if you read this whole chapter, you're going to see that these guys are actually strapped. They all have their swords, they're ready to rock, they're ready to go, and they're not messing around. So the question is, If we are both spiritual and we are both fleshly, how do we as Christians fight in the messy middle? Because their fight is not with flesh and blood, though it's materializing that way. Their fight is not with those who are trying to kill them. Instead, the real fight for you, Christian, when you have that annoyance and that person shows up and you're ready to just give them a little black eye, just a little slap just to make yourself feel better, the real fight, church, is this. How are you going to honor God? That's the real fight. How can I honor God in hard situations? How can I honor my spouse? How can I honor my friends? How can I honor my mother, my father? How can you honor those people that begin to annoy you in that moment? Because as Christians, you're called to lay down your life, and you're called to love those who hate you, to bless those who curse you. Or will you succumb to the temptation and just turn out all flesh? Just have a flesh day, right? Let everyone know how you feel. The other day I was with Scott, and he showed me a proverb, and it said, basically this rendition of it, but it said, the fool tells everyone exactly how they feel. And I was like, oh man, I've been so foolish so many times. That word cut me so deep because I was like, I just got to be honest. I just got to tell you the truth. Here's how I really feel, right? And the fool does that. Why? Because our goal is, how do we honor God in hard situations? How do we honor him in hard settings? So listen, if you want to push past the messy middle, you have to learn how to fight to be faithful to the call that God has issued on your life. And do you know what happens when you are faithful to the supernatural call of God? When you choose to honor God in the midst of that messy middle, in the midst of that battle, in the midst of that blow up and that flare up, do you know what happens? Let me show you what happens. Verse 15 happens, which is exciting. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plans, we all returned to the wall and worked. Who frustrated their plans? God. You see, when you seek God first, Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, and what? All these will be added to you. A lot of times we fight for the things. A lot of times we try to add the things in our lives, and we forget the key, to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And you see, as these people in Nehemiah began to seek after God and to do God's will, God shows up and God fights for them. But look how beautiful the evolution is in this passage. Verse 10, they started out, we're not able to do this by ourselves, right? They were working together and they still didn't have the ability to do it. Then in verse 15, God had frustrated the plans of their enemies, which gives way to a rally cry in verse 20 that says, our God will fight for us. They went from by ourselves to our God. And that's the journey when you find yourself in the messy middle. To get away from your own reliance, your own strength, even the strength from your friends and your coworkers and everyone else that you sort of draw strength from, and to really draw strength from God and allow God to do that. And I want you to notice this, what does not happen in the messy middle between those verses. They never get stronger. They're still weak. Nobody's out handing out 5-hour energies like, hey, you just pop one of these, man. It's pretty good. Just put that, just chug it. You'll be good. You'll be good to go. Right? They're not overdosing on caffeine. They're not trying to streamline. Okay, now if we just sort of make this workflow a little bit better, it'll make everything easy for everyone else. They don't do any of that stuff. Reinforcements don't even show up. The rubble doesn't shrink. The natural does not change. The problem in verse 10 is still sitting there in verse 20. So what moved? Not them, but him. And church, that's a challenge for you this week. When you find yourselves in a hard spot, how do you let go and let God? How do you really put your faith into practice when someone's talking down to you? And you know everything they're saying is not true and is taken out of context and you just want to pipe back. What do? You trust God. You allow God, and you sit in that place where Jesus sat. The God of the universe, Isaiah tells us that he became a man of no reputation. Are you willing to do that in order to be obedient to the call that God has on your life? So, church, here's what I want to leave you standing with. Some of you still find yourselves in very hard spots. You find yourselves in the messy middle. You're not really sure. Your strength is failing. Your natural senses, you're looking around, you're observing, and you're like, I just don't know how I can do it. I cannot go to work on Monday. Oh my gosh, if that person greets me first thing in the morning, I don't know what I'm going to do. That pastor greets me at the door on Sunday, so help me, Jesus. Right? What do you do in that moment? What do you do when the reports are loud and you keep getting bad reports that just keep knocking you down and knocking you on your bottom? What do you do with that? And that phrase, by ourselves, we are not able. What do you do when that starts trending in your life all week long? But at the start of this new week, when the weight comes, church, when the heaviness rolls over you, when you find yourself trying to parent and you don't have the support, you don't have the resolve, when you find yourself trying to be faithful, but it just seems out of reach, here's what I want you to do, church. I want you to remember. I want you to remember how great and how awesome the Christian God is. That's where you draw your strength. That's where you find your unity. That's when you begin to live out your Christian walk, and it goes from theory to practice. Remember how the good hand of the Lord has been upon you, has been upon your family, has been upon others. And remember that that good hand is going to propel you into the future. He's the same today, yesterday, and forever. He's the Alpha and the Omega. Not one word is going to disappear from him. He's trustworthy, church. And so when you find yourself in that messy middle, remember. And I want you to remember this too. You are not going to be overtaken, church. You are more than conquerors through him who has loved you. Some of you need to pray Romans 8 this week. Just read through there. Look at your identity in Christ. Draw your strength from him and not from yourself. So this week, church, don't fight your neighbors. Don't fight the people at the stoplights. Fight to be faithful. Fight to be faithful to the one who remains faithful to you even when you're faithless. And know this, church, that he who began a good work in you, right? It's him. He's the one that started working in you, and he will bring it to completion. My hope is built in nothing less than Jesus' blood.